How do you write about a thick, dark forest if you've never been in a thick, dark forest? How do you write about London if you've never been to London? A couple of weeks ago, I got this email. How do you write about places you've never been? What if you've never been somewhere with shady forests and don't know what it's like to be in a busy fair? I'm a little afraid to try describing things I've never experienced, yet they seem necessary for the story I want to tell. How do you describe the sounds, smells, textures, sights, and emotions you've never had? And that's what we're going to talk about in this video. By the end of this video, you will know the 6 steps to writing about places that you've never actually been in, doing it confidently and without embarrassing yourself, at least not too much. In case you're new here, hi, I'm Katri, I'm your new writing bestie, and this is Protagonist Crafts, the place for people who are kind of obsessed with that whole writing thing. Before we properly begin, let's address a very basic thing. Yes, you can write about places that you've never been in. Write about things that you have no experience in. It's possible and it's legal. I mean, people even regularly write about times that they've never lived in. Although there's the small difference that if you write about the 1800s, there's not going to be someone from the 1800s correcting you. I think oldest living person was born on August 21, 1909. But if you wrote about Shanghai, for example, there are at least 24 million people who could give you their opinion, so it is a little more precarious. So now that you know that you can do it, let's talk about how. Step 1, think, why do you even want to write about this specific place? When you're writing fiction, it's best to choose the most effective possible setting for your story. And I'm not at all trying to discourage you from writing about places that you don't know or you don't have personal experience in. But I just want you to know, why exactly have you chosen this place for your story or for a specific scene? And the point is that you need to know why it's necessary. That's going to help you hone in on what actually is important about that place. And when I say important, I mean important to you and to your story, not to me or some guy. If you've chosen to write about the Alps, for example, because you think it would be a nice, cozy, picturesque setting for your story, then you would want to focus on and emphasize those things when you're doing research for your story. And yes, we will be talking about research. You might not need to know what type of rock the Alps mainly constitute of. I was going to tell you what type of rock just for fun, but when I Googled it, there were far too many words that I didn't know how to pronounce, like gneiss. So I just decided to skip that. It's for the best. And then step 2 is find pictures and videos of this place. Maybe this sounds obvious, but it is only step 2 after all. So have some patience. Thanks to the modern times we live in, shout out to any time travelers, you can find pictures and videos of almost any place on Earth that you can think of. Think of this place that you want to write about like you're its biggest fan and compile an entire database of material about it. Be a stalker of this place. Find things about it from all angles at all times. Be a little obsessed. Okay. For example, if you wanted to write about a forest of mainly deciduous trees, you'd want to look for material on all 4 seasons so that you know what it looks like all throughout the year. You'd also want to look for pictures and videos at night, during the day, during snowstorms, early mornings, foggy evenings, stuff like that. Even if your story only takes place in summer, you'll still want to know all that stuff so that you can be like, unlike in winter, the bird song was loud enough to drown out the sounds of our horses, or something like that. Also look for content made by different types of people to get multiple perspectives. If you were writing about a forest, and I'm going to use a forest and London as examples throughout this video, you'd want to hear the thoughts and opinions and perspectives of people who live in that environment where maybe they've lived their whole lives and it's like a totally native environment for them. But also you'd want to think of people who have just moved into a forest from the middle of New York City or something. If you were writing about London, you wouldn't just want to learn from tourists and watch these sightseeing tour pictures. You'd also want to learn from people who actually live in London, and that means people who live in Tower Hamlets as well as people who live in Chelsea. And yes, you will want to focus on the things that will actually be relevant to your story, but you don't want to have this one-sided view of things and you don't know the whole truth of it. You want to get as close to the truth in your story as possible. And also, you just don't know what kind of interesting little authenticity nuggets you will uncover when you just keep an open mind when doing your research. For example, one time I was watching one of Hannah Rickett's videos. She lives in London and has a lot of London content, mostly like hotels and restaurants and stuff. And she was going around in shops and it was a rainy day. She had an umbrella. And it was news to me that you could just like leave your umbrella at the entrance, like near the entrance of the shop, so that you don't have to carry it with you to the shop and make, the shop and the merchandise wet and stuff like that. It wasn't a video on umbrella etiquette. I wouldn't have known to look for that information. So just like consume a wide variety of content, whether that is, content or like books and movies and stuff. Well, movies, that might not be a very good source. Do you even know if that movie has been filmed in the location that it's pretending to be? Anyway, you never know what you might find that might actually turn out to be a very good little detail to include in your story. So from all this material, you can start parsing together some very convincing descriptions. But of course, you will want to go beyond what things look like and also think other senses and how people interact with this place. What do they do there? And some of that you will also get in the next step, because step 3 is listen to real people's experiences. There's nothing that people won't talk about on the internet, so you won't have to just settle for watching people live their best lives in a forest or in London. You can also hear all about it, have them tell you what it feels like, what it's actually like. There's also a lot of memoirs out there in the world, and it's not all celebrity memoirs talking about their drug-fogged pasts. You can find real normal people living their lives in interesting places, and you can learn a lot from them. Personally, I've learned a lot about living in the Chinese countryside just because I've read quite a few relevant memoirs. So what is it really like living in the middle of a forest? Someone will tell you. There might even be a Reddit thread like, ask me anything, I live in the middle of a forest in Sweden. You'll want to go beyond the things that people assume it's like. So you could specifically look for misconceptions about these things so you can clear them out and not make the same mistakes in your story, because that might just be a little embarrassing. Like how in Friends, Phoebe's on and off boyfriend, David or whatever he was called, moves to Minsk and then they're like, oh, it's freezing cold. Oh no. It's like, first of all, Minsk is not in Russia like they claim in Friends. It's in Belarus. And also, please look at a map. It's like, it's here. It's not this level here. It's not freezing cold. Okay, so don't make that kind of a mistake in your story, please. And if I, a Finnish person, wanted to write about living in London, then I might look for contents made by other Finnish people who have moved to London, where they can talk about the differences between these places so that it can sort of highlight for me, like, oh, okay, I thought this was obvious. I thought everyone does that, but it's different in London. So you will want to address the biases that you have, and you won't know them before someone points them out. But yeah, that's sort of like what I didn't expect, or misconceptions, or these things are different between this and this place. That's good material for you, so that you won't make the same assumptions in your story. It's all too easy to think that your normal is everyone's normal. And hey, you could just ask someone. I'm constantly asking dumb questions from my friends who live abroad, and some of those questions are even relevant to my writing. So keep a list of all the interesting factlets that you uncover during this process, like, are birds surprisingly loud in the morning in the middle of a forest? Or maybe Covent Garden smells of pee. I don't know if it does, but I had to say something. And what do people do there? How do people get through a forest or through London? What do they do when it snows? You'll have to find out, and you will. And then step 4 is, what do you already know? You already have some life experience, I'm sure. So what can you use here? So maybe you live in a rainforest. Can you use some of your experience to imagine what it's like to live in a big forest in Sweden, even though, yes, it is very different. If you've never been to London, but you've been to Paris, what similarities could there be between these two European capitals? Of course, to know exactly what stuff you can use, you do have to do the research detailed in the previous steps. But some of that could give you these epiphanies where you can be like, oh, okay, it's surprisingly similar to this thing I already know of. Let me use my experiences and my thoughts and feelings about this thing and add them here, apply them to this other thing. You never know. Then step 5 is decide what actually matters. By now, you already know a lot about living in that forest or in that London borough. But do you actually have to use all of that information? Well, the good news is no. Often just a few well-chosen details can really elevate the authenticity. Why do I struggle with all these multi-syllable words today? What is going on? Authenticity can really heighten, elevate, and up the authenticity of your story and your writing. But also, maybe your readers don't care that much about it. Maybe it doesn't matter as much in your specific story. You'll need to use your judgment and maybe read other books in the exact genre that you want to write in. For example, I recently finished the Scholomance trilogy by Naomi Novik. I'm not a big fantasy reader and I'm a standalone gal. I don't like series, but I just really liked the world building in these books. Then in the final book, the protagonist, she was a bit all over the world. She was in Beijing, she was in New York, in addition to these magical settings. And when she was in Beijing, it just felt like a sort of like an empty backdrop. It could have been anywhere. Same thing with New York, really. And yes, it stood out enough for me to pay attention to it, but it didn't really matter because they were soon back in the magical settings that were exquisitely built, and I really felt like I was in there. So, like, it didn't really matter. She didn't need to go to Beijing to learn what it's like to be in Beijing for this one scene. I don't know, maybe she did do that and it just doesn't show on the page. I don't know what Naomi Novik does on her free time besides, fan fiction. But yeah, maybe you don't need to go above and beyond. Maybe just a little is enough. I need to know this. And then step 6, the final step, make things up. I'm putting this in the bottom of the list because before you can start making things up, you do need to know what's actually going to matter. You don't need to just take something from real life, lift it up and put it in your story exactly as it is. You can mix and match. And hey, maybe there isn't a street exactly like you want to write about in London. Making up a whole London borough might take your readers out of the reading experience, which is something you want to avoid. Unless, of course, you're writing about some sort of a future and you want to be like, yeah, we took Waltham Forest and Hackney and combined them into whack. Making up an imaginary street, though, is far less immersion breaking because who knows all the streets in London anyway, unless you're a taxi driver? You can take things from real places and then combine them to come up with a fairly convincing imaginary place for your story. Even Dickens, who basically knew every inch of Victorian London, made up the Tom All Alone's slum for Bleak House, so you can do that too. You could also come up with your own imaginary forest and model it after a real forest, as long as you don't expect your readers to believe something like, oh yes, there's the Amazon rainforest. Everyone knows that. I'm writing about the Amazon rainforest. All right. It's very well known. Everybody knows that. Again, it's just hard to believe in and it takes you out of the story. When it's something like that big, it's harder to suspend disbelief. If you're writing speculative fiction of some sort, then of course it's a different deal, but it's a different mindset for the reader when they start reading anyway. And don't be like, well, nobody knows anything about Russia. I can just make things up as I want. I can come up with the whole city. Nobody's going to fact check that. That's very disrespectful to your readers. And also it just shows your own ignorance and assumes that everyone else has the same ignorance level as well. And I think by now we can stop making up African countries just because we don't want to do research about a real country. All right? So now you have a solid to-do list about writing about a place you've never actually been in. And because I respect you, I'm not going to be like, oh, you want to write about a place you've never been in? Just go to that place. It's easy. It's like, that might not be feasible. And also maybe you just don't want to do that. I'm sure you have your reasons. If you wanted to and you could, you would. All right. So I'm just I wasn't even going to go there. All right. Since you're writing fiction anyway, it's kind of your job to imagine, to make things up. It would be a different deal if you were writing non-fiction. And listen, just do your best, because you are going to make mistakes, and it's all right. Someone's going to point out, like, this doesn't sound very authentic, and it wouldn't work like that, and that place isn't there. That isn't how it works. And it's like, that's going to happen. Just accept that. Don't get stuck thinking you need to be perfect, because the only way to stop making mistakes is to stop living. And just, let's be real, being dead is far more boring than making mistakes and being alive. You've got this, and I will see you in another video, unless I'll see you in a big dark forest. I hope you're not a bear. Bye bye.